The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. From the studios of Asheville FM, 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you decide to do that.
This week, I, Burse, spoke with William Buddington, a digital security expert, about various topics under that heading. We spoke about encryption for texting, email, and mobile devices, operating systems, anonymity on the internet, safer practices with social media, doxing, and more. The conversation was ranging and a bit thick at times due to my very specific style of posing questions. Thusly, the notes will be very long, with lots of links embedded for further reading on the topics in our blog post at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org. If there are other topics around security that you'd like to hear discussed on the show, please drop us an email at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net and we'll mull it over. And here's a quick jingle from Rebel Beat Radio, a member of the Channel Zero Network. Listen in at channelzeronetwork.com.
Yeah. Yee! This is M1, M.A. Uno, M.A. de la gente comprende y entiende, you feel me? I'm one half of Dead Prez, to tell it like it is, everything is political rap duo. Here holding my middle finger up to imperialism worldwide. And you in tune right now to the Rebel Beat.
The Rebel Beat is a monthly podcast of radical political music across different genres and across different continents. It's the mixtape to a riot against police brutality. It's your nightly newscast set to bass and beats. It's protest anthems from Hong Kong to Istanbul to Ferguson to Montreal. Give it a listen at rebelbeatradio.com or subscribe today on all your favorite podcast platforms.
I'd like to quickly announce that the 2018 Certain Days Freedom for Political Prisoners calendar has just been posted as ready for pre-order. The calendar is a joint fundraising and educational project between outside organizations in Montreal, Toronto, and New York, in partnership with 3 political prisoners being held in maximum security prisons in New York State: David Gilbert, Robert Seth Hayes, and Herman Bell. The proceeds from Certain Days 2018 will be divided among these groups: Adamir Prisoners Support and Human Rights Association from Palestine, Release Aging People in Prisons, RAP, and other groups in need. More info on the project and where to sign up for a calendar can be found at certaindays.org.
For all you artistically minded listeners out there who would like to see their art worn by people, potentially all over the world, the Final Straw Radio Project is looking for t-shirt designs. If you like the show, or love it, or think it's just okay-ish, but like to make designs, then this challenge is for you. We will be accepting submissions until the end of November, and lest you think this is a one-way street, the winner of this challenge will receive a special prize from each of us, Bursts and William, that's me, of a personal and one-of-a-kind mixtape, which will include all sorts of audio goodies. Runners-up will also get prizes, so never fear, there's no hierarchy here. Want in? Just email your submission and any relevant info to thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net and keep your ears peeled for the winner announcements.
And now a word from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? We're caught like a
Why is it that we have all of these security cameras everywhere, but we don't have public access to the footage? I think that as long as civilization continues to shamble along, the general public who paid for the cameras ought to have complete and unfettered and immediate access to the images that all of those cameras capture. Here at Warren Corruptional, there are cameras everywhere, both inside the buildings and outside in the common areas. The video footage shows everything happening everywhere except for in the cells. You paid for this prison. You paid for the salaries of the employees working here. And in fact, you paid for everything the video footage captures. And yet, if you file a public records request, you'll be denied access to the video footage that your security cameras recorded. Let me give you a case in point as to why the fascists never want public access to the video footage. Robert Angles was my cellmate for more than a year. Angles is in his 50s, and there's a lot of things I could say to criticize the poor guy. He's an absolute slob. He can be annoying. His financial management skills are horrendous. But I can tell you one thing. Angles is not a creep. He's no sexual predator. Because he's been in multiple car and motorcycle wrecks, he's had his right arm, his ankle, and his spine rebuilt with steel plates and pins. He walks like Frankenstein and has zero manual dexterity. His balance is terrible due to brain damage from a coma. So taken together, Angles is like a bull in a china shop. He worked in the chow hall where they have cameras everywhere to stop theft of food. He was a pan room worker, which is the worst job in the chow hall. On August 4th, he was working in the chow hall and got fed up with being the only guy in the pan room. So he went out to have the corrections officer call in the other workers. The officer with the roster and clipboard that morning was Officer Burkett. She was up front with 2 male officers and a male lieutenant. According to the conduct report that Burkett wrote, Angles approached her and asked her to check the roster to find out who was supposed to be working. Then, according to her, he fondled her right breast with his left hand. She then put him on the wall and cuffed him. I saw Angles after that when he came back to the cell to pack up his property and go to SEG. He said he didn't do it. He said he really didn't do it. I believed him, not just because I know him, but because I know also that if Angles had reached for Burkett's breast, he would have poked her eye out with his thumb. But I also spoke to Corey Pringle, another prisoner here who witnessed the event. He said that he saw everything and Angles never grabbed Burkett's breast. Pringle even sent an email to the tip line, an email accessible by the institutional inspector, Cynthia Hill, and by Deputy Warden Casey Barr, and by Warden's assistant, Greg Kraft, among others. Pringle was never called as a witness for Angles, even though he told the administration that he was a witness. I also sent an email to administrators notifying them of Angles' injuries and disabilities, and I shared with administrators information intimated by other staff that Officer Burkett used to be the love interest of the Rules Infraction Board Chair, Lieutenant Nelson. That means that Angles would get an impartial hearing before the guy who used to be Burkett's main squeeze. Lieutenant Nelson is now happily married, so there's nothing going on with Burkett. Yeah, sure. Still, it would seem appropriate for someone other than Lieutenant Nelson to preside over the case. Nobody cared. Angles was found guilty and is now slated for transfer based on a charge that is the equivalent of a sexual assault on staff. And that means that wherever he goes, Angles will be harassed to no end. He's going to get something close to the Swain treatment. In short, his life for years to come will be burned down. Thing is, lots of folks have access to the security footage here. Even some officers know how to access it, whether they're supposed to or not. So, I didn't ask around, and I didn't find someone to pull up the footage. I didn't watch it with my own eyes. There are 2 cameras with perfect angles on the event. The events happened between 8:21 and 8:23 a.m., not at 8:30 as Burkett alleged. At 8:21, Angles walked into the chow hall. Burkett came in from outside. 3 male staff were standing near the door. Angles engaged Burkett, and she held the roster in front of her. She was facing the security camera. Angles stood next to her at her right side, not facing her. His left arm was down at his side. He pointed at the roster with his right hand when suddenly Burkett turned and snapped at him, maybe annoyed that he was standing too closely. But when she did, she startled Angles, and you can see him on video clearly raise his hands up as he steps back, and his left hand comes up from his side, not from cupping Burkett's breast. Further, the 3 male staff were standing right there. You can bet that if Angles had grabbed Burkett's breast, and if that was her initial claim, he would now have the lumps and bruises and stitches as souvenirs. Guaranteed. The footage I didn't see was available to the institutional inspector, the deputy warden, the warden's assistant, and a whole host of administrators. Still, Angles is slated for transfer based on Burkett's provable lie, and her former boyfriend, Lieutenant Nelson's mass grave rubber stamp, and everyone else's apathy. Why? In part because the video footage is not public. They saw it, but you didn't. All video footage from all security cameras everywhere needs to be publicly accessible, so the sleazeballs like Burkett and Nelson and the rest of them can't get away with their nonsense. I imagine the phone number to this clown show is posted somewhere, so machete-wielding, ski mask-clad savage cannibals out there can share how they really feel about this brazen and intolerable public corruption. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain for More and Corruption in Lebanon, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at Sean Swain 243-205, Warren CI, P.O. Box 120, 5787 State Route 63, Lebanon, Ohio 45036. Updates on his situation and more writings by Sean can be found at seanswain.org.
These days, more and more safe anonymity is harder and harder to come by. As an offset to the availability of technology, the speed of information, the choices in digital apparatus, more and more of our personal information is recorded, stored, and sold to private and governmental institutions. Especially for folks that are interested in engaging in risky political ways, such as direct action, the stakes are higher, and what personal and traceable information may be leaking becomes harder and harder to gauge. So I'm joined here by my friend to talk a bit about computer and digital security. In order to have this conversation, I solicited some subject matter from friends asking what they'd want to hear about. So I'd like to start by thanking those who contributed materials and also thanking our guest. Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to first start by addressing three different but sometimes overlapping categories of agents that this conversation and the information presented may be addressing. Those being the government, corporations, and like political enemies or reactionaries. Can you talk about the way that these entities or these nebulous evildoers collect information and how their intentions may differ?
Yeah, for sure. I think that we can look at information gathering by governments historically and see, for instance, COINTELPRO as a really great example of the way that information and misinformation campaign can have a pernicious effect on social movements. So COINTELPRO existed from 1956 to 1971. It engaged in all sorts of disinformation campaigns, from seeding the seeds of discontent and the seeds of infighting within the Black liberation movement and civil rights movements, as well as various movements against poverty and against to make sure that people, just various social movements in general. And what happened was that COINTELPRO was extremely effective in gathering this information and destroying social movements, sowing paranoia, and they never really stopped doing it. COINTELPRO officially, the program officially ended in 1971, but police tactics and federal tactics against social movements goes on to this very day. We can see this with the coordinated attack on Occupy. We saw this with the Black Lives Matter movement, and it has kind of moved into this different realm where the attacks and attacks are more sophisticated than they used to be, and they moved online. So in the broader context of government spying, you have people that are soliciting more and more information and sharing more information online through social media, through professional networks like LinkedIn, through Twitter, Facebook, etc. All the ways that you share information that you probably don't think about the government kind of, looking over your shoulder at every moment. Well, there are even dedicated law enforcement and police in the social networks constantly trolling the archives and all this information and your timeline to map out our social networks and, again, sow the seeds of destruction within the ability for social change to happen. So that's kind of government's role. Government and reactionaries have in the past worked hand in hand, and they also, recently have definitely been working, particularly white supremacist groups and local law enforcement, local police, have been working hand in hand. So much so that it was even alarming to the FBI. And the FBI, not necessarily in any way our friends here, was investigating local law enforcement for the influence of white power groups within the police. So there's overlap with all three of these: government, reactionaries, and white supremacist groups, neo-fascists, and corporations. And I think that what's going on here is that the government, in terms of reactionaries, they use them as kind of a extra legal force in some way to sow paranoia, to make us afraid, and to also dissolve our movements, to kind of make us paralyzed to do anything. That includes tactics of bodily harm, harassment on social media, and additionally, there's no accountability process that can come to bear. I mean, we know as people in social movements that with the police there's no accountability, but it's especially true when you're talking about white power or neo-fascists, because there is no legislation that they are bound to abide by, because they can just act however the hell they want. This is a really kind of scary thing, and it makes our movements, have to think about how to deal with these problems. For corporations, you can see it's, obviously profit-driven motive. Usually, depending on what we call your own risk assessment or your own threat model, usually they're very concerned about security for their customers, but a lot of times they're not very concerned about privacy. They'll collect a lot of information, and often that information is seeded into programs like the PRISM program that the government runs. And the NSA is able to gather this information that's stored by these corporations and use it to their own ends. You can imagine three overlapping circles here between government reactionaries and corporations, where our information, the information that comprises our social movements, our activities, they're circulating throughout these networks, and we no longer have the ability to control where that goes. I mean, it's a kind of question of bringing that information back.
Here are three or maybe less or maybe more competing institutions or groupings you can think of that if our information gets into their hands, it'll be used as a weapon against us. So there's different frameworks for addressing how to limit the amount of information that gets in their hands that might be used against us as weapons.
So governments, reactionaries, and corporations kind of are complementary in the way that they have access to your information. And what you can do to protect yourself depends on what threat you're facing and what adversary you have in mind for that particular moment.
So a normative part of social existence today, especially among younger generations who've grown up on the shoulders and the off-ramps, of the information superhighway, is social media. Educational apparatuses, court systems, police and prisons, employers, potential romantic partners, all of these institutions and individuals pay attention to if you have a presence on social media and what's represented there. Likewise, politics on social media is experienced as a very important thing. Can you talk about safer ways of engaging in social media?
For sure. One of the books that I really love is Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, like mathematics. In Weapons of Math Destruction, she describes how your information that you post or the information that can be gathered about you is used in all sorts of different contexts, social contexts in your life. One is through the hiring process. Another is, algorithms that will bias your ability to get loans, to be able to buy a house, all these different things. And in machine bias, ProPublica researchers discovered how your information can be used to form mandatory sentencing guidelines and how computer algorithms can feed into suggested sentencings in various states. And so there's all this kind of information that you put out there that's gathered. It's not only voluntarily, but the way that if you're walking down the street, the fact that you're trying to connect to your home Wi-Fi with your phone, that can be tracked, and that information is being tracked by corporations which want to gather information about your purchasing habits. So there's some really basic things that you can do to improve your digital hygiene. And one thing is, well, if you don't need to be connecting to a Wi-Fi network, then you can turn your Wi-Fi off on your phone when you're not at home. In social media context, you can actually go and make sure that as much information that you can is locked down or only provided to certain circles of friends that you want to provide information to. Or you can just, shut down old accounts. For instance, everyone used to have a MySpace account. Do you actually still use that? Do you need that? Maybe that information can be used against you at some point. So there's a lot of things that people can do to go back and to analyze what exactly can someone else find about myself. So this is obviously relates to some of the recent doxings that have been happening by the alt-right. How much information about me is out there, and what can I do to protect myself? And often the question is, and the answer is a lot. There's a lot of information about ourselves because we don't have those best practices in mind. There's an interesting analogy that I heard the other day about how we should be cautious about our information, but not let that cautiousness bleed into paranoia. A really kind of everyday example is when you're crossing the street. You don't necessarily think, I can't cross the street, I'm living in fear, there's all these cars around me, what am I ever going to do? But you do exert a certain amount of caution that you have as a baseline. You look both ways, you see a car coming, you let them pass, then you cross the street. So it doesn't actually paralyze your actions, but you have a certain amount of just reasonable precautions in play at any given moment. And that was actually historically something that had to be built up. Lots of people got run over by cars in the early part of last century, especially in the 1920s when cars were first coming around. That basic digital hygiene, that consciousness about what dangers are out there and how to protect ourselves against them, that is as much about the technology as it is about our own habits and what we can do about the information out there. Well, we can, one example I already mentioned was clean up the information out there that are from orphaned accounts, close down those accounts. Check your settings on Facebook, check your settings on Twitter and social media. See what information out there on LinkedIn. If you're on online dating sites, then maybe you should exert a reasonable amount of caution before chatting with someone that you don't necessarily know yet. So there are a lot of kind of ways in which you can be conscious of these effects and formulate habits that protect yourself and your comrades.
So one thing that I've heard before is in terms of just digital security in general, or talking to people that you don't know and don't know that you can really trust, no matter what the medium is you're communicating with them, is imagine what you're saying being played back to you in court. Imagine what you're posting on your Facebook wall being presented in the discovery for a court case that you maybe have nothing directly to do with, but it's being pulled up about someone else. Is that like a smart approach of just like be not necessarily overly paranoid, but just reticent or safe in those ways?
Yeah, I think there's a dual risk here, right? There's, on the one hand, the risk that someone that you're directly communicating with isn't who they purport to be. But there's also the risk that you're using a third-party service to communicate with them. If you're not using strong encryption, then there's the risk that that information is being delivered to governments. And, especially with the larger third-party sites, you think of Facebook, you think of Twitter, you think of OkCupid, you think of all these different services that people use, and they're servicing millions and millions of people around the world. You can be sure that there are dedicated police that are trolling through that information. And if you're not practicing good digital security hygiene, especially as anarchists or as anti-authoritarians or as people that are involved in social movements and direct action, there's increased risk, and we need to make sure that we take a proper amount of precaution while not letting it bog us down and not letting it make us so paranoid that we're not able to do anything.
So if you note that someone who's close to you is engaging in questionable social media practices, maybe talking about things that they don't know about or shouldn't be talking about, or bragging or whatever, do you have any suggestions in how people can engage them and offer suggestions of safer practices?
I think it's always useful to point out that their actions affect others. And if you tag someone on Facebook, for instance, with their real name without their consent, that obviously affects them personally. But what's less obvious is that an action taken individually can affect your comrades and friends. For instance, if because of your own lack of security, your personal information such as home address becomes leaked, then that's obviously affecting everyone that you live with. And may subject them to harassment, physical harm, arrest. So employing those basic security hygiene steps goes a long way in protecting yourself and others there.
So you've already kind of touched on this, but these days people walk around with little computers in their pockets, little recording devices configured to be noting your desires by the speaking of a certain word, like Siri, where is blah, 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 or potential shopping opportunities by your proximity to certain business, by their Wi-Fi, or by just you having your GPS on your phone, hypothetically. Your tastes based on past purchases or words you typed into your search engine. Can you talk about why this might concern people and safer methods beyond turning off their Wi-Fi to limit what your phone records of your activities?
Yeah, it's very disconcerting that our devices are collecting so much information on us all the time. And with the Internet of Things and home assistants like Google Home, it's likely to only get worse. So the sensors in your house will be able to tell approximately where and when you're at home, who you're with, content of your conversations, and what you do in your private time. And all this information is collected, and what's done with it is really, really very opaque. We don't know how that information is being used by corporations to market products at you, sell your information. We don't really know. But what we do know is that that information is being stored somewhere, and somewhere is in what's called the cloud. There's a saying that the cloud is just other people's computers. That's true. The cloud is just a fancy term for the place where corporations store this information. And it's stored in data centers. It might be stored in multiple data centers around the world. And what we've seen is that these data centers are not only for storing this information, but they also are sites that governments or hackers, either government hackers or individuals, use because they're centralized repositories of so much information, so many people's conversations, so many people's, when they're at home or who they're with, all that information, that they become real targets for hackers. And it means that these particular places become the subject of hacks. And over time, and these are called, in the lingo of information security, it's called data breaches. And so data breaches we've seen, become more and more prevalent, affecting more and more people over time. And this, for instance, in 2013 and 2014, over 1 billion people had their Yahoo accounts compromised. this is a significant portion of the world's population. So when we volunteer our information to corporations, we have to think about not only is it them storing it and the implications of Google or Yahoo or Apple having that information, but also the potential for hackers to compromise those systems that they use, or governments, as we've seen in the PRISM case, to have a backdoor or have another way to get at that information, and for that to really affect people's ability to keep that information private, even within your Gmail account, or even keeping in mind that Google has it.
Going about one's life, paying taxes, voting, registering one's car, changing one's address with the post office can leave a footprint that will be visible. There are sites one can access to see what one's breadcrumb trail of identifiable information might be. Anti-racists use these sites to dox people, as well as other methods, or to detect their personal information and then release that info to make the lives of those organizing hate more difficult. But racists also use the same sites to undermine the organizing of anti-racists and radicals, especially the less observant of us who leave an easy trail. Being a part of a rebellion and defining ourselves in opposition to the status quo, whether from a revolutionary or a reactionary position, can feel sexy. For those of us on the revolutionary side of things, are there safer practices to minimize our visibility from those searches, such as like opting out from certain sites or removing our automatic registration of things like familytree.com, registering under fake addresses, this sort of thing, or not using certain services?
Yeah, and let me just take a step back and talk about doxing more generally. So doxing kind of has been a practice by both the alt-right and the left more recently, but there is kind of this long history that goes back and hits the spotlight in Gamergate. And when you had women that were developing games, such as Zoe Quinn, and her game Depression Quest became this focus, a spotlight, and you had men's rights activists, they're called themselves, MRAs, that basically, because of the content of these games, which was, God forbid, it was created by someone who is female-bodied, and they, released all this information on Zoe Quinn and others. And in the Gamergate kind of cycle of doxing, you also had Anita Sarkeesian, who's done a lot of cultural critiques on patriarchy in video game industry and also in the content industry, such as movies. And her information was released to the public such that she had to move from her home, was receiving death threats every day. Even public figures like Felicia Day, who is kind of like a nerd icon and actress, had her information doxed when she spoke out against Gamergate. So you have this first cycle of doxing. So then you had the Black Lives Matter movement. And DeRay McKesson, who is a prominent Black Lives Matter activist, had his Twitter account locked out. So what happened was that someone that was trying to target DeRay for being this prominent activist got access to his phone number. They actually called up and impersonated DeRay and said, "Hey, I'm locked out of my account. Can you switch my phone number to this different phone I have?" And so they were able to use their SIM card to take over his account. And because he had this way of logging in that relies on multiple levels of authentication, one of which was getting a text message, he couldn't get text messages anymore, and his account was effectively, taken over. He wasn't able to log in anymore to his Twitter account. So there was the Black Lives Matter cycle of doxing, and the only reason why you're able to get that, and have that moved over to a SIM card is, the attacker's SIM card is because some of that information they knew and were able to provide to his mobile provider. And now in the current iteration of doxing, you have neo-fascists that are targeting Antifa protesters, using doxing to put attendees of protests under suspicion of a crime, handing it over to law enforcement. And just last Monday, there was some investigation and some information that was handed over to Unicorn Riot on chat logs that were on the chat communication platform Discord in a coordinated effort by neo-fascists to provide courts and police with information on protesters in Charlottesville. So the coordination happened before, obviously, that information was handed over to Unicorn Riot, but it had all this, all these chat logs of neo-fascists that were joking about running over protesters with cars, and as we know, that happened, and all this information, hate speech, all this kind of stuff that is embedded in these chat logs. So, you know, and also them coordinating with each other to target individual activists, individual Black Lives Matter protesters or Antifa protesters in a way to hand that information over to the police, to the courts. And so you have this, you know, kind of snowballing effect of doxing. A lot of this information is available on publicly listed sites called data brokers. So data brokers are gathering information about where people live, their phone numbers, their date of birth, all sorts of information on the past locations, their relatives, etc. And they collect this information, and either for free or for a fee, they are able to deliver it to whoever's looking for it. And so federally, there has to be an opt-out for data brokers. So these data brokers include Spokeo, Been Verified, PeakU, People Finders, Addresses.com. There are various data brokers that do this, and they all collect different sets of information. Some, you know, don't collect email, some do. But what you should know about them is that there are two different kind of tiers of data brokers. One is kind of first-party data brokers, and one is the second tier, so the first tier are the ones that actually gather that information from public listings, from, you know, court records or what have you. And the second tier of data brokers basically just take that information from the first tier and provide it via their website. So what's pertinent information here is that if you're able to scrub your info from the first tier of data brokers, then over time it'll vanish from the second tier as well. Unfortunately, the process of removing your information isn't very straightforward in a lot of cases. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. If there might be a form on the website that you can go to and say, hey, I'm this person, remove my information, and then it's instantly removed. But in various cases, you actually have to take a scan of your driver's license and send it to these companies. And that takes a lot of time and effort. It's not as easy as, you know, it all disappears all at once. And often the response time from the data brokers ranges from instantly to a month. So there's no good way to remove all of your data all at once. What you can do is you can subscribe to services that do this for you. So they automate the process of removing all your information. And there are various services. There's one called Delete Me by a company named Abine, A-B-I-N-E. If you go to abine.com, they'll have kind of a subscription rate that you can sign up for a year, and that'll remove your information from these first-tier data brokers. But maybe you don't have that cash just lying around. So what I would encourage people to do is, if you are at risk or your friends are at risk of having this information about you released, or you've been a target of doxing before, or you fear that you will be in the future, get together with your friends. This process can be a laborious process. It takes time. So instead of doing it alone, get together with a bunch of your friends and go through this process together. It's a good way to build community, and it's also a good way to learn together how to remove this information, how to protect yourselves. It builds strong community defenses against the ability for the alt-right to dox us.
When you were mentioning the Twitter, just to jump back for a second, and the verification system that you had talked about that was attached to getting a text message, basically. Do you think that switching over those accounts to having a two-step verification increases the security?
A lot of times it does. Unfortunately, Twitter is a platform that does it in a specific way. So, for instance, there's no way in Twitter to use two-factor authentication that uses a dedicated app. You have to do this via a text message. There's programs that you can download on your phone, like Google Authenticator or Authy. And these are applications that basically just display a 6-digit code in order to log into various services. And this is great because if you change your phone number, or if, for instance, this attack, like what happened to DeRay McKesson, happens to you, then they don't automatically have access to that code. You still have that on your phone because it's stored on your phone. The way that this process works varies from service to service, and some do it better than others.
So
I don't know. I think that maybe it's hard to kind of it's hard to describe two-factor authentication in such a short time period.
No worries.
But hopefully that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So there were two really thoughtful essays on its going down in response to the J20 arrests in D.C. during the inauguration, or after the inauguration, I guess, is when the article came out. And they were called Your Phone is a Cop, Part 1 and Part 2. These essays came as a response to the fact that a number of the people arrested that day had cell phones on them during their arrest, many who were newer to political activity, and many unaware as technology is constantly shifting, whose phones may be used against them in their prosecution. So these essays talked about the information present on people's phones and safer means of engaging that information. Can you talk about cell phones again? Can you talk about protecting your physical cell phone from coming into contact with law enforcement, reasonable security measures one might take, realistic fears of prosecution based on information on a phone, and so forth? I mean, if you're not engaged in street action, how likely is you have to fear for the information on your phone?
Well, people fear for information on their phones just through theft, for instance. I mean, there's a huge threat, right, of you just leaving your phone at, I don't know, a meeting spot or a bar or whatever. And that, if you don't take proper steps to protect your information there, then, even if you are the most law-abiding citizen or whatever in the world, you have dangers that you need to worry about with devices keeping so much of our lives. And so there are steps that you can take to really protect yourself before going out into the world. And whether that's a protest situation or, just kind of going to a bar with friends or just going to a meeting with friends, there's steps that you should really be aware of. And the number one step, I think, is to make sure that full disk encryption is enabled on your device. This means that all the data on your device will be encrypted. And if your phone is turned off, it's very, very difficult to get at that information. If your phone has a screen lock on it, it's very, very difficult to get at that information if it's using good full disk encryption. A lot of devices already out of the box nowadays have full disk encryption on by default. iOS devices, if you have an Apple iPhone, then those have been encrypted with very strong encryption for a very long time. For Android devices, you need to kind of go into the settings and make sure that you're using good encryption. Usually there's a settings, like a little cog icon, and then you can look into the security settings from there, and then it'll tell you the status of whether your device is encrypted or not. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that you want to not only encrypt your phone with full disk encryption, but use a strong passphrase like 8 to 12 random characters, something that you can type very quickly if you get in the muscle memory of doing it, but it's not very easy to guess. So that's one tip.
And that's better
The other
than
tip
like
is that
using a thumbprint or a pattern, right?
Yeah, so I was going to actually mention about fingerprint unlock. Often with Android devices, at least, fingerprint unlock is an option that you can enable in addition to either pattern or PIN or passphrase unlock. So you should definitely use, some strong passphrase. And whether you choose to unlock your phone with your fingerprint and every day for convenience, that's up to you. But if you're going into a process situation where you're potentially arrestable, then it's always a good idea to remove that fingerprint unlock before getting there. So, turn this functionality off. It's very easy physically for a police officer to just, take your finger and unlock your phone. And if you have fingerprint unlock, then that's the threat. If you're like documenting a protest or whatever, then there's ways to do this without actually unlocking the phone and typing in that really complicated passphrase. You can go into your settings, and in iOS, you can swipe to the left and get into camera mode. So you can actually take videos when the police are about to shoot tear gas canisters into the Antifa crowd or whatever it is. And then with Android, you can simply, in Nexus devices, you can hit the power button twice very quickly, and that'll allow you to go into capture media mode. So there's that. Also, I think that most people are getting more aware of this over time, but installing Signal as a way to communicate with your friends, to organize. This is a really powerful tool that uses strong encryption that lets organizers make sure that only the intended recipients will be able to read messages that are sent to them. There's various programs, and I think Signal is the best in breed of encryption programs, at least encrypted messaging programs for everyday users. Other tips for your phone in protest situations is to just turn it on airplane mode. If you don't need it, then you can turn it on airplane mode or leave it at home. And, maybe choose a meetup spot with you and your friends. If you get disconnected with them, if you get separated, then choose an actual meetup spot that you can go to and have that pre-planned. There's no substitute for good planning in those situations. So, especially when we're so trained to have our phones on us at all times and just use those, we get into these habits where it's very difficult not to have them on us. We encounter unexpected situations, and we're trained to kind of just use our phones. But if they don't have those on us, then you need to kind of have a little bit more foresight and do a little bit of planning beforehand. So choosing a meetup spot. Another option is using a prepaid or disposable phone. What's great about this is that in various states, you don't even need to show your ID to get a disposable phone. So if you and your friends get disposable phones, you can use those in situations to communicate with each other. One thing to keep in mind there, though, is that if you have that disposable phone on and you are carrying your regular phone on you as well, then that location information can be used to track you and to link your disposable phone with your real phone. So that's something to keep in mind. There are a lot of different techniques that you can kind of use. Another great tip for these situations is instead of using a car to get there, use a bike, because what increasingly police are using is these things called ALPRs, which are automatic license plate readers. And these take photos of your license plate. They keep them in large databases, actually often circumventing data retention laws that police are required to abide by using private corporations that give access to police. So what you can do is, instead of making yourself vulnerable to that level of tracking, instead of taking a car there, you can bike there. So these are kind of practical tips. Not only is biking better, but like for you and your health or whatever, but it's great. It's a great way to avoid surveillance.
Well, okay, you covered a lot right there. Do you mind if I jump into a couple of the questions that parse out a few specifics?
Sure.
Okay. So after the San Bernardino shooting, where someone who self-aligned with ISIS went to their work party and shot up the place and killed some people. It was terrible. But afterwards, the hoopla, because that was universally condemned, was around whether or not Apple should unlock the iPhone that the shooter had to see if there's any information to trace back any other connections in case the person wasn't just a lone wolf of some sort. And so the FBI and Apple were wrestling in public for a while about whether or not the phone will get unlocked. And eventually it did get unlocked. And that information from within it, at least some of it, was released. And Apple had to fight pretty hard to refuse to give up the cracked phone, but they did it on behalf of, I guess, the security of their patrons or their customers. So, in your opinion, does this point to Apple folding or the government having a back door? And how does that bode for people who have iPhones or encrypted Androids?
So what I believe happened was that the government used a third-party vendor to crack the encryption on the phone. I might have been mistaken, but I think that's what happened. And so this kind of points to what's called vulnerability markets. And what that is the fact that the security of devices in general, whether it's your computer or your phone, they're not 100% secure, ever. There's always going to be some vulnerability, whether it's known or not, in the way that these devices are put together, in the way that the encryption is implemented, the code that goes into the programs that you have installed. And so what happens is that researchers and companies will use this fact to look for vulnerabilities in software. And these vulnerabilities, depending on how secure the software is considered to be, can actually pay out a hefty price. So, there is a site, if you go to zerodium.com, zerodium.com/program.html, you'll see that there's this chart that gives you how much vulnerabilities in various software can get you on an open market. And so, for instance, if you are on any OS looking for a vulnerability in Signal that can run up to $500,000. So what the government did in this case was that instead of obliging Apple to create a backdoor for the iPhone, they simply circumvented that process and bought a very expensive, I would presume, 0-day in the encryption in the iPhone. And that was able to circumvent the normal mechanisms of the iPhone encryption and get and unlock this device. And they, because of this, they no longer needed to pressure Apple into, breaking with the promises to their users. And they simply used that exploit to get the information. And so, this is a big danger. There was a big debate last year, especially, and since last year, about mandatory encryption backdoors. This means that every device, the government wanted it so that every device that you possess will, if they're using strong encryption, will have a key that the government has to unlock that device as well. For instance, this will be for any encryption program that you use, or if you have full disk encryption on your computer, unlocking that computer, for instance. And this enables really cheap mass surveillance. The government already has a way to get at information if you're high enough of a profile target that it warrants them spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on you. In the San Bernardino case, who knows how much they spent, but I would imagine it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for that particular exploit. So they have ways of doing targeted surveillance on users, but what they wanted was even a step beyond that, to do mass surveillance at a turnkey on everyone that had an encrypted device. Yeah, what you point out is really right. As long as there's a high enough price on your information, then eventually, maybe it'll take a while until a vulnerability is discovered in the software that you're running, but eventually the government, is likely to get at it. But the real way to protect against that is to make it expensive for them to do so by using encryption that's very strong, by making sure that the software is well vetted by third-party security audits. That makes the vulnerabilities for these applications much more expensive because it takes a lot more labor to find them and to flesh out those bugs. And so this is all kind of touching on this idea of the vulnerability market. And you can see that in this website that I mentioned, 0DM, which vulnerabilities run for what cost. But the way that you can protect yourself the best is to make sure that you're using well-vetted applications and applying security updates in your operating system and making sure that any vulnerability that is discovered is patched quickly in the platform that you're using.
With phone calls under American law, technically, law enforcement is supposed to seek a specific kind of warrant to be able to wiretap people's telephony, right? But as we're shifting more and more into computer-based communication and away from that older platform, the protections don't necessarily exist in the same way. So whereas a lot of people would have made a phone call to communicate, to have a conversation, now they're texting. So it seems like encryption of text messages or emails is super important for that way, or for that reason, because information could be scooped up. So there's a device that's been distributed through a lot of law enforcement agencies and used pretty widespread, especially in certain neighborhoods, but also, against the no DAPL struggle and in a number of other situations, called stingrays. A lot of local police departments have these. Can you talk about what stingrays or fake cell phone towers can do?
Yeah, stingrays, or they're also called MC catchers, IMSI catchers, are able to basically make themselves look like a legitimate cell phone tower to your phone. And so your phone connects to that instead of your cellular provider. And what happens then is that when you send text messages, they're able to intercept those. They could possibly spoof text messages to whoever you're sending to. So this is a technique of surveillance that's used by law enforcement to get at communications with you and others. And yeah, this is increasingly being deployed against social movements. You see this in local police. They'll, have a line in their budgets that says that they're buying these stingrays. So yeah, these are one piece of technology that is used in a whole gamut of technologies by police to monitor and interrupt and disrupt social movements.
I mean, the fact is, like, if they're swooping that stuff up, and even if they're not applying it immediately, like, it's wrong-headed to assume that unless you are a really important target, your information is specifically being scoured through by paid agents or some computer, right? A lot of it's just being scooped up as metadata, if nothing else, and stored until a case might come up that, would be able to include that information, right? Yeah,
that's a great point, is that the information that's being gathered can always be used later when building a case against you. So I'm not a lawyer, but it's important to know that this technology, even though maybe you're not doing anything wrong now, all the information about you in the past can also be used as evidence in you in court to build a case. So approach it with caution.
Yeah. You had mentioned Signal before, so I'd like to talk about Signal really briefly. But there's a number of end-to-end encrypted texting apps that are super easy to install on your phone that are free. You just maybe have to jump through, and sometimes for desktops, but you maybe have to jump through a few different hoops or have a SIM card to attach it to or whatever. But the ones I can think of off the top of my head include Telegram and WhatsApp and Signal. And Signal's awesome in that it was produced by a crew of anarchists, and that's called Whisper Systems. However, I've heard critiques of this app from comrades because it was using Google Push to announce on Android devices that a message was received, and therefore everything was being databased through the Google Push database. So, and I think that's the right way of understanding it. I might be incorrect in understanding it, but people were concerned about the fact that everything, even if it was encrypted, was going through this database. Also, that app was only downloadable through the Google Play database, which Moxie explained publicly because he was concerned that if it was coming from other sources, it might have flaws in it, or it might be a fake version of the program. Anyway, well, since that point, I've heard that the push database issue has been worked around. Can you talk to those concerns about Signal, or are you familiar with it? Is this just kind of like off in the realm of rabbit hole?
No. So yeah, what you're touching on is Signal's reliance on Google Play services to send push notifications.
Okay.
And until very recently, that was true. Signal absolutely relied on Google Play services being installed on your phone in order for you to get notifications when you get new messages. I don't know what, like, the extent of information that was being delivered to the Google Play services in order to receive those notifications. But what we do know is that in a case in the District of Eastern Virginia, Signal was issued a subpoena in order to get information at a target of surveillance and a criminal investigation. And they were only able to fork over the last time that user was logged on and when they signed up for the service. And they weren't able to get any other information out of them. So what Signal does is they do, their code has been audited. They do employ best practices in cryptography and in implementation of that cryptography in the actual way the code is written to protect your messages. The other thing is that they recently removed the requirement to have Google Play services installed on your phone. And so if you don't have that particular thing, which is basically the ability for you to get push notifications in order for the phone to buzz when you get a message or whatever, then it won't go through that service, and your phone will basically fall back on connecting with Signal's servers and keeping this one connection alive to tell whenever you get a new message through Signal. So yeah, there's that. There's the ability for you to use Signal on devices without that installed. The other thing that you touched on was the fact that you can't get Signal unless you go through the Play Store. So that was true, but recently they've made the application available. If you go to signal.org/android/apk, you can actually download the application directly, and that way you won't need Google Play services. They don't recommend this for most users because this means that you have to fiddle with settings that actually make your device less secure overall. So they definitely suggest that you use Google Play to download the application. But that is an option that they provide now. So they have been responsive to the ways in which people have complained in the past about their reliance on Google services, and they're doing some response. They're being responsive to that and trying to make it more available for people that are a little bit more conscious of where their applications are coming from and their reliance on Google. The other applications that you mentioned, so you mentioned Telegram and others. Signal is a best in breed. WhatsApp uses Signal's protocol, their encryption protocol, to actually deliver messages. So WhatsApp, underlying cryptography of WhatsApp is actually using Signal, but the settings in WhatsApp, the actual configuration of WhatsApp, makes it very, very hard to use with the assurance of security. One way this is manifested in terms of usability is that when you download WhatsApp, it prompts you to back up your messages to the cloud. So that means, back up your messages to Google Cloud or Apple, and it prompts you to do this. And you have back it up every 24 hours, every week, every month, and then at the very bottom it says never. And that's the real setting that you want to choose. But the problem is that it keeps on prompting you every once in a while to back up your messages to the cloud. And so it's very hard over time to make sure that you're always choosing the right option if you have that prompt every, week or so. So you need to make sure that you're very careful about, choosing the right option in WhatsApp in order to maintain your security. I think that WhatsApp is a great application in general. I think that people should use Signal because it uses secure defaults. But if you're talking with your friends and your family and they only have ever heard about WhatsApp, then it's better than using regular old text messages for sure.
So email encryption is generally a tougher subject to approach. It's got more steps involved. It differs from operating system to operating system, program to program. Can you talk about why encryption is good with email? And we've covered that a lot in terms of text messages. And what services are available? From what you'd suggest, what are some differences between them?
Yeah. And I think that people have focused a lot on services like Proton Mail. Proton Mail provides some encryption, but it provides it in a way that the encryption program is delivered to your browser every time that you open the website. And so that JavaScript code that's being delivered to you is potentially susceptible to an attack called a man-in-the-middle attack, where it's modified in real time to add a backdoor. This isn't a threat when you're talking about dedicated applications that are downloaded from your, that they're downloaded in the Play Store or that you download separately, because a lot of times those are provided with digital signatures and they're compiled beforehand into the application that gets delivered to your phone or operating system. And in that way, they have the ability to strongly vet and like kind of to sign this out of band of it being delivered to you. And so email encryption, like with Proton Mail, for instance, I would say, Proton Mail, you can use it. I think it's a useful service to use, especially if you're using Tor and trying to generate a new email address. It's one of the few services that allows you to do that, because if you're using the Tor anonymity software, a lot of sites actually block you from creating email addresses if you want to do that. Proton Mail doesn't. So that's a great use of Proton Mail. But it doesn't provide as strong encryption nearly as using something like PGP, pretty good privacy. But as you kind of alluded to, PGP is notoriously difficult to use for everyday users. If you are interested in it and have the time, then I think that it's worth looking into and worth using. It definitely provides strong encryption, but it doesn't do so in a way that is easy to download, easy to set up, and it will take a while before you get up to speed with it.
And just to say, Proton Mail does have an app that you can download if you have a smart device that can access the Google Play Store or whatever.
Oh, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I mean, but it doesn't enforce you using that, right? So you can still use it in a way that's very insecure. Like the WhatsApp has this problem too. For instance, if you're using WhatsApp, then you're using what's called a desktop client. It's actually a browser client. And when you connect to that service, it's doing the same thing pretty much as Proton Mail is, where it's delivering all the JavaScript application that you're using to encrypt your communications as you load the website itself. And so that's kind of a lower bar for security than a dedicated application, which is compiled and signed out of band of the actual delivery of it.
So there's also, I'd heard pretty good things about Tutanota, I think an Italian-based end-to-end encrypted email provider, but I'm not sure if they're web-based or app or what.
Cool, I haven't heard of them.
What's Tor? What are VPNs? And maybe where's some good further reading on those subjects?
Yeah, so Tor is maybe a term that you might have heard about, and it's something that you should be using, but don't know how to use it or don't know what it does. So basically, Tor is a piece of anonymity software. It ensures that when you connect to the internet, you're doing so in a way that protects your anonymity. Tor browser is a browser that uses the Tor anonymity network and patches the Firefox browser in a way that makes it appear anonymous when you're browsing the web. So if you go to the torproject.org, torproject.org, you download the Tor browser, then you are browsing the web, and you are put in a pool of users that all look pretty much the same, so you can't pinpoint any individual user. It looks like it doesn't reveal your IP address, for instance, which can be tracked to your location. What it does is it bounces your connection to 3 different servers in the Tor network, none of which have enough information to link you to the communication that you're making with the Tor browser or with the Tor network. So your connection is bounced through this Tor anonymity network and then goes on the public internet. So it's really interesting because when you open the Tor browser, you go to google.com and it looks like you're going to Google from Brazil or from the Netherlands or wherever. And that's a good indication that actually they don't know where your information is coming from. So your location is also hidden when you use the Tor browser. So basically it's a great tool for doing research or if you want to make sure that your communication is truly using the best anonymity that you can get while browsing the web. And so that's what the Tor browser is and what Tor network is generally. VPNs are companies or services that obfuscate what your IP address is. But with VPNs, you need to actually trust that service to be doing its job. VPNs basically wrap your connection in an encryption that goes to that service, and then once it gets there, it unwraps that encryption and then sends your browsing traffic along its way. It's kind of doing interneting for you, if you will. So there's a variety of different VPNs. Some of them are ranging from, hey, look, this is obviously shady, to this is a very good and vetted for VPN that people use all the time and has good privacy policies and has good data retention policies, and et cetera. And if you Google for that one privacy site, so that one privacy site and the letters VPN, then you can actually compare and contrast which VPNs have those good privacy policies, which are in jurisdictions which have good laws relatively, and don't keep all your information forever kind of thing. And so, yeah, there are a few recommended VPNs. Private Internet Access is a good one. There's also one called Mullvad, Mullvad. There's various VPNs that have kind of withstood the test of time and are developed from members of the broader information security community or, activist circles. Rise Up, for instance, if you have a Rise Up account, you already have VPN credentials. Rise Up's VPN is relatively slow, but you can get on it and do your browsing through Rise Up. These are various ways that you can kind of protect your location information. It doesn't provide true anonymity, though. It only masks your IP address. So there, if you're using the Tor browser and you're using the Tor network, in contrast, Tor browser does a lot more than just use the Tor network to protect your anonymity. It also does, basically makes your browser, as I said earlier, look like all other browsers. If you're using a VPN and just using Chrome or Firefox on top of a VPN, it doesn't do that. It doesn't take those extra precautions in order to truly protect your anonymity. So if, for instance, the government comes knocking and demands that a VPN set up monitoring on your connection, then they can easily do that, and it's not using as a robust technology in order to truly protect your anonymity, to truly give you anonymity guarantees like Tor does. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Other thing is that VPNs, being private services, are often cost some money. So you can sign up for a VPN, and typically, they can range, but they're typically in the order of $10 to $20 a month, and or even cheaper sometimes. And that way you can kind of browse the web with a relatively heightened privacy profile, but it doesn't really give you the anonymity that Tor browser does and Tor network does.
We've been speaking with William Buddington, and who's a digital security expert, a internet wizard. Thank you so much, William, for breaking down all this stuff and, taking the time. Really appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this interview with William. Make sure to check out our website, thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, for show notes with detailed approaches towards researching further along these said conversed topics. If you want to hear in the future about certain tech security issues, give a listen at the end of the show for our contact info.
The views expressed on the Final Straw Radio do not necessarily reflect those of Asheville FM, Friends of Community Radio, or any of the affiliate radio stations airing the show. From the studios of Asheville FM, 103.3 FM in Asheville, North Carolina, this is The Final Straw, and I'm William Goodenough. The show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions or suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net. Also, if you're interested in rebroadcasting any episode or segment of the show, you're free to do so. Just send us an email if you decide to do that.